just factually. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pretty mellow by nature, and I have a pretty well-trained, mind at this point.
Yeah.
And it is still so hard to not start getting into inner arguments with people who I think are idiots about something, these days, about the coronavirus, about Russia, about Trump, about who knows what, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's like a gravitational force field. Like a sci-fi film, your spaceship is getting sucked into the black hole and you have to, So it really helps you appreciate the gravitational pull of that stuff, to know that even if you have strong engines, it can suck you in. So, but basically good. Family's safe. I'm safe. Business has changed, right? It's so online right now. On the other hand, I think maybe you're finding it too, a deeper receptivity, more of a willingness to look for help and counsel and wisdom at this time.
Yeah, it's that's a really good point. I have team really pretty much all over the world, and my dev team is in Poland, and my chief science officer is based in Greece. So I've always been very virtual, but it helps understand how global this is, because everybody is calling from their apartment, or everybody's calling from home when we do our daily stand-ups and our daily meetings. And you can see over time the weight, and you just kind of give people a little more grace when things aren't quite communicating properly or, how they should. So it's actually a relief for me to hear you say that. The man is human.
It is really human. It is really human. I was also involved in, I don't know if we want to bring this into the podcast, whatever, we can repeat it. But for myself, it really helped me to realize that it was sort of like there were three piles. And it's like, where do I want to dwell? One pile is where I'm trying to understand what's happening at a lot of levels: public health, politics, how dangerous is this virus to me, to my family, okay, fine, and what should be done, and who's right, who's wrong, blah, 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 that pile. And then I can live second in compassion. I can keep focusing on, just like you said, grace a little for other people. And they're scared too, they're freaked out as well. They don't understand everything. They're suffering. They're alone in the hospital. They're sick, and no one can come visit them. Right?
Yeah, those are sad stories.
Yeah, compassion. And then third pile is just, what am I going to do? I'm going to talk to Erik today. I'm going to try to stay calm while we figure out how to talk on Zoom. I'm going to be grateful that I have your phone number and a cell phone. I'm going to look out the window and see the jasmine blooming on the fence and my neighbor's dog just kind of yakking next door. Like, okay. And of those three piles, I think we spend too much time in the first pile. And it's the second and third piles that really are where the payoff really is, where the real gold is.
Yeah, that's really true. I love your book, and I've been through it.
Neuro Dharma?
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm happy about that. It's a hardcore book.
That is a hardcore book. There's so much. We could talk about that for days.
It'd be fun. Oh, honestly, Erik, I feel like we're like, like compadres, right? We're both practitioners. And,
well, plus we're both mountaineers.
Oh, right. That, and the metaphor of the mountain and all that. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what you've done, but I did the Grand Teton this summer, and I did the Matterhorn this summer, and I did Kilimanjaro this summer. So I got
That's
it all
impressive.
It was the summer of Erik, right? And
that's pretty great.
I've had to pay my dues since, but so.
Wow, that's pretty great. Yeah. Anyway, it was great to marinate in that material. So I got to ask you, I nearly went up the Grand, but then for different reasons, the trip fell apart, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm really curious about the Matterhorn, because it's such a classic peak. And, there are these famous stories of people dying on it. What was it like? Did you have a guide? Did you go by yourself?
Yeah, I would not advise going by yourself. You really need a guide, because the Matterhorn, essentially there is one route up. And it looks like there are hundreds of ways to go up because the rock face is very similar. But if you get 2 or 3 steps over here on the north face or that's where everybody dies. And so if you go with the other thing about the Matterhorn is it's a race. Like you are going and you're moving. And because you've got to get up and get down. Essentially what happens is everybody lines up in the Hornley Hut about 3:30 in the morning, and the local guides go first, and then it's the guides who aren't local, and then it's the people who are by themselves. And and then it's just a race, right? Because if you get up really fast and early, which is anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5 hours is a good pace, then you're not going to get stuck in the chain coming down. Because when you're coming down, so we got up in 4.5 hours, and on the way down, you're literally using the same anchors to rappel down that people are using to climb up, and you're going over people. So it's really chaotic. It's a super fast pace, but it's gorgeous. It's just really, really epic, I don't really remember the climb up because I was so focused on my breathing and just keeping moving.
Yeah, it's a real huff. I mean, I hardly believe it's true, but I'm 67. And so I've recently been struck by just the loss of muscle mass. And how certain things that I would just take for granted, that I would put my foot on something and my ankle would hold and my calf muscles would engage. I wouldn't think I'd step up. Now I put my foot on it and it flops off, which is kind of scary.
That is scary. Yeah. You don't want that,
Wait.
right?
Wait, what?
No bueno. No bueno.
Hi. That's funny. Hey, just for fun, have you seen the film The Dawn Wall? Have you seen that?
Yes.
Okay. And then another one that really struck me was the one that was just recently released when Honnold and Tommy broke the speed record on El Cap. Did you see that as well, by any chance?
Did. Yeah.
Caldwell, yeah. Okay, good.
That's crazy. I don't understand that. They're because they're holding on to these little cracks and just almost hard for the eye to even see. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It really is. I'm scared to death for Alex one day. I just feel like that slip's going to come, but maybe not. Maybe he'll be the only one that gets through it.
Yeah.
But he seems so calm. Talk about neurodrama.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he's an interesting guy. I've never met him personally. Psychologically, he's interesting.
Yeah.
Because you kind of ask yourself, is he on the spectrum?
I think he is, actually.
You think so?
His mother has said he is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a warmth in him and an empathy in him, but he's oddly dismissive of others.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We are recording. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
we are recording. I love
it. Oh, that red light's been flashing the whole time. Who knew?
Yeah, you can't blame me.
It's like the bomb, the bomb is going off. The clock is working.
Yeah, there was no warning. I just hit it.
That's cool. That's great. Well, we're in it. You're in charge. You're my guide. I'm going up the mountain with you.
All right, awesome. Well, first of all, I appreciate it. I recorded the intro and everything already. So there's a lot that I would love to talk to you about. And, as we were just talking about, the world is in a very, very, I don't know, what would you call it? What kind of state are we in right now?
We have been invaded.
Mm-hmm.
And the enemy is now among us, the enemy, the virus, the plague. And we also, in many, many countries, feel that our leaders are not doing the right thing on either side of the political spectrum. So that's happening. And I think another thing that's really makes it hard is that whatever we do today, we will not see the results of for 10 to 20 more days. So we're dealing with this delayed reaction. It's like driving, in a fog, in a winding road, high in the mountains, and you don't know where the ice is. And what you do with the brakes or the gas or the steering wheel now will not take effect for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how hard would it be to drive down the mountain if that's the case? So I think that also makes it really difficult. We're now living with what people chose to do 2 weeks ago, and what we do today, for better or worse, will be inherited by the people who will be around, and hopefully us, 2 weeks from now. So I think all that is really distressing for people. It's scary, it's weird, and I guess I have two quick takeaways. I think there are two big lessons in this time for many people. One, the recognition that they need to invest more in their inner being, because as long as the music's playing and the sun is shining and everything's groovy, it's fine, right? You get propped up by your activities and settings. But when the music stops and the storm comes, you're left with what's inside you, what you've grown inside yourself, that you can really count on: grit, gratitude, compassion, wisdom, know-how. And second, I think we see the results, honestly, in many countries around the world where there's been an attack on the very notion of the common good. And there's been a sustained politicized attack for a generation, really, on the bonds that knit a society together effectively, including, for example, in public health and public health preparedness. And again, that's fine as long as the music's playing, the sun is shining, and the weather's great. But when the hurricane finally comes, as it always does, it hits the building that's been hollowed out by this lack of investment in its infrastructure of various kinds. So I think there too is a big takeaway for us all, that we really need to invest more in community, in our relationships, in healthy institutions like public health systems, science, respect for the truth. And I hope those are two lessons that people will take away from this time.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the book at some point, but I think this is such an interesting conversation and has to do with what you bring up in the book. But I've been working on some projects, and, in England, they've started this. They've got what is in the US a 911. In England, they have a 111. And what is the healthcare system, the HMS over there?
NHS, I think.
Yeah,
National
NHS.
Health Service.
Yeah, National Health Service.
Yeah.
And so anybody can call on that. And pre-COVID, they were getting, and this fundamentally, it's for just any kind of health call. But 20% of those are mental health calls. And the rate of mental health calls that went up after COVID hit the first couple of weeks was several 100,000 a week. Went to. So they've actually started, and the people I talked to say, we don't really know what we're doing yet, but we've put together, the NHS has put together something called social prescribing, which is encouraging or prescribing people to go out and be social. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And they actually have what they call link workup coaches so that people can link up and work up, and members of the NHS, employees of the NHS are acting as these coaches to help people get out. So they are recognizing that connection and social interaction is really important. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. You know the phrase tend and befriend? Have you heard that before? Tend and befriend? No, not together. Okay, it's cool. So that's really nice. So, I respect you a lot, Erik. So it's cool that I actually know something that, you might have never heard of. Trust me,
and then there
are oceans full of that.
Then you can do payback. You can do it to me. But anyway, so this professor at UCLA, Shelley Taylor, studied how women handle stress initially. And she observed that many women handle stress effectively, not so much by fighting and fleeing, fight or flight, but through tending and befriending, which kind of sounds catchy. It's this idea, just like you said, take care of others for their sake as well as for the ways it calms us down to be helpful to other people, and befriend, make relationships with people, even if strangers on the street. Take that little extra beat, as I think many people are doing these days, to say, hello, how you doing? Maybe you're 10 feet apart, but how are you? This is all crazy. We're in the middle of it together, comrades in arms. So tend and befriend. And I think that's really part of how to get through this time, tend and befriend.
I think that's a great point. I've noticed.
And it's not just women, obviously, it's men in general, but it started with research on women. Yeah.
Yeah, of course it did. They're the higher species. We know that, right? They're the more evolved species. How's your wife, Jan?
Well, thank you. She's really good. We have a daughter who's deeply wise as well, and our son too. So we're doing okay. Thanks for asking about that.
Yeah.
And you're okay. Your family's okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I've got 4 boys, and they're all healthy, and they're kind of all over the place. But one's in San Francisco. He works for investment. He works as an investment banker, and he's been quarantined in San Francisco for, going on 8 or 9 weeks now. But everybody is going through kind of the same process. I noticed at home, we've got our youngest son who's a senior this year, who couldn't do any of the senior stuff.
Yeah.
Graduation, and that was obviously devastating for him. But what you were talking about earlier, which is nobody knows where it's going to be. I think in the beginning we tried to predict, like, it's going to be over in a couple of weeks. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Everything will be okay. And offering that kind of general advice almost is infuriating to my son right now, because he's like, no, it's like, we have no idea what it's going to be, and don't tell me it's okay, because, it just kind of sucks. So yeah, it's really interesting to try to navigate all that.
Yeah.
But thanks for, so it seems like just a really big mental health crisis. And I know that there was a survey done recently by a talent recruiter, and they said 43% of hiring managers are more concerned about, their mental health and well-being are their main concerns when it comes to employees working from home versus productivity.
It's funny. I think about my dad. He was born on a ranch in North Dakota in 1918, November 1918, in a sod house, walls 3 feet thick, no radio, no electricity, no running water, no flush toilets, no TV, no internet, no cell phones. Like, hard to believe, right? Mm-hmm. And I think about his life on the ranch, how he grew up and got into fish and game, eventually became a zoologist, his story, my mom's story, raised by a single mother, a ne'er-do-well of a father, and a lot of difficulty there, poverty, and the whole fundamental idea of self-reliance, turning inward, building strengths inside, and because of that, being more capable oneself, and also more capable of helping others. And I think this time, there's so much that we don't have control over, we don't have influence over. It kind of goes to the serenity prayer for me. But there are things that we really do have influence over every day. Are we a jerk or not to the people we live with? I'm working on that myself, right? Where do we put our attention? Do we obsess about and ruminate about things that we worry about and can't, or resent, or are outraged about? A little of that goes a long way. Or do we take action inside our minds and put our attention elsewhere, someplace useful? How can I develop my business? How can I wash the dishes? How can I do a little mindfulness, become a little calmer? What can I do? And I think that's what we're called to right now, and to really admit, which a teenager may not want to admit, the ways in which we've always been pretty helpless. We just covered it over. And now we realize how helpless we are in the face of so many things, but that can turn us to what we can do something about, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So in regards to the title of the book, what is the use of the word Dharma? What's your goal there?
That's great. It's really it's an understandable question. So there are many ways to develop ourselves, right? And if you want to get good at something, study people who've made it their life's work. Study people. So if you're interested in resilience, deep calm, deep compassion, inner peace, contentment, people who talk about who seem radiantly happy, while also being very wise and effective and loving, not selfish, not a jerk. How do they do it? How do they do it, right? And so we see people who've developed themselves through many traditions around the world, including secular traditions, including the native people, first people, indigenous traditions, as well as in the kind of major religious traditions, such as the one I know best, which is Buddhism, especially the original teachings of the Buddha, which are arguably not a religion at all, but in fact are just deeply, deeply psychological.
Yeah.
So the word Dharma is respected in the Buddhist tradition as a way of talking about what's true, whatever's true, and an accurate account of the truth. It's a word from India. I deliberately used it as a way of pointing to the perennial wisdom of the ages from around the world with a lot of respect. The neuro part is to point to the ways in which, with modern science in the last 10 years especially, we have learned amazing things about how the brain embedded in the nervous system, embedded in the body, embedded in life altogether, how the brain is actually helping us to become calmer, wiser, happier, more loving, stronger, and so forth. What's going on inside the hardware when we're in a really good place? And then we can work backwards. We can kind of reverse engineer what's going on in the brains of the sages and teachers throughout history, or people we really respect, So for example, we think about a teacher, a mentor, a sponsor, and who has qualities that, wow, I'd like a little more of that. I'd kind of like to help that sink in. So I'm a little bit more like that as the sort of the habit of my heart, right? We work backwards from them, and then we think about how to grow that in ourselves. So for me, to bottom line it, Neurodharma brings together those two ways of helping ourselves, both from the outside in, scientifically, and from the inside out, psychologically and spiritually.
Okay. So you said you dedicated this book to your teachers. So who were some of those people in your life?
Wow. Well, one teacher might surprise you. So I was an extremely shy kid, shy, awkward, and neurotic. And I landed in college at 16, UCLA, landed there in 1969, and somehow had the courage to run for dorm president, which was a bigger deal than it might sound. There were 800 people in the dorm. There was real money, real budget. It was also a time of great ferment in the country, student rights, civil rights, human rights, gay rights, women's rights, and all the rest of that. So at the ripe old age of 17, I'm suddenly the president of the dormitory with no social skills. How'd this happen? And there was an assistant dean in my residence hall at UCLA, Dykstra Hall, who seemed like a real old lady to me. She was probably about 25. She was the assistant dean in charge of student government. And I would watch her. Her name is Carol. I would watch Carol in a meeting, and she would say things, or she would let stuff just go by, and then she'd come back to it later. She would just have a nice vibe, and I would just stare at her. I was like Spock trying to study McCoy, at Star Trek. How do you do that? How do you emulate a human? How do you fake being normal? And I studied her. I watched her. So she was a great teacher, actually, for me. I learned so much from watching her. She was a major teacher. You might surprise people. Another major teacher for me actually was another woman many, many years later, Christina Feldman, who's a meditation teacher from England. Herself has tons and tons of deep practice. And here's an example. She was in a little workshop I was in, and everybody talked about their own background with meditation and personal growth. And she paused and said, what about concentration? So I tell this story in the book, in the chapter on steadying the mind. What about concentration? What about being able to become deeply present and deeply absorbed? Sort of the muscular aspects of mindfulness practice. Not stressing and straining, but really bringing that laser-like focus to the granularity of your experience, moment by moment by moment. That had a big impact on me as well. So she was a teacher of mine. I've had many others. I'll probably watch you and learn things from you, actually.
Well, we learned, it's funny because I learned so much from my kids.
Yeah.
And I think we all have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
And I've been doing some work with maximum security prisoners for violent crimes in South Carolina. And there's something that's really interesting with this chemical dopamine, right?
Yeah.
Because dopamine is the reward chemical.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about this, and I thought maybe you could help me think through this. So, I think you said anger is a seductive and potent force. Most people don't like feeling anxious, sad, or hurt, but the hot rush of anger can feel so good. It's your fault, and of course, I got mad. You deserve it. In the brain, anger draws on dopamine and
Norepinephrine.
norepinephrine. Thank you so much. I just ate, so that wasn't going to happen. To feel rewarding to you. So how do we change the brain and the reward circuitry? Because dopamine is something that is the trigger that drives addicts to the addictive behavior.
Yeah.
So why is the brain trying to protect somebody? Is that a learned dopamine response? And how do we change that dopamine response?
Well, I love that you zeroed in on that. And it's wild to really think about it, that when we're sad or anxious or we feel hurt, it doesn't feel good. But in the rush of anger, it feels good, doesn't it? And there's that rush of anger where you get violent, you hit something, maybe you kick the table, you don't kick another person maybe, but boom. Or the rush of righteousness, or resentment, like, you jerk, you did me dirt. There's something about it, even though what's the saying? Resentment's like taking poison and waiting for others to die, right? So, and so functionally, I mean, these systems evolved biologically because they worked. And I think
worked
about
when and how, like when were they first?
That's a really great question.
Yeah.
I'm not a total expert on this, so I'm going to but say it. So the nervous system's been evolving for 600 million years.
Yeah.
Okay, that's quite a while. And while reptiles, fish, crabs, spiders, especially maybe fish, seem able to have extremely primitive, simple emotions, it's really with the mammals that you start seeing the development of emotion in its full sway. And in a cat, you can trigger a rage reaction based on structures in the brain of the cat that emerged in evolution 200 plus million years ago. So it's been there for a while. And as humans, whose ancestors, we've lived in hunter-gatherer bands most of our lives. This is profoundly useful to really recognize that the way we live today is completely abnormal. It's totally unnatural. We lived in small tribes of 50 people our whole lives. And much of that time, while there was occasional cooperation and sharing with other bands, especially if we had kind of some sort of loose clan relationship, much of the interactions between bands were bloody and lethal and dangerous. Kill the men, take the women, enslave the children, move on. And so bands that were full of Quakers, and I have a lot of respect for Quakers, and I come from a nonviolent, Buddhist tradition. Still, bands that were just full of a bunch of pacifists got annihilated. It was Game of Thrones. And so there was a place for the development of the capacity to be violently angry and warrior-like. It was also true that bands that were full of nothing but sociopathic bullies did not do very well because they couldn't cooperate very well with each other. So in the classic parable, the two wolves in the heart, love and hate, we have both capacities. But that capacity for anger and rage and violence has definitely been conserved in us. And I think, like many other capacities, there's a place for it. There's a place to regulate it. I did an interview recently with a Navy SEAL, former commander of Navy SEALs, and who helps veterans come back, out of the service and still find a sense of mission and honor and purpose. And to me, the place for the warrior, I respect warriors. I appreciate them. I get it. I'm comfortable. I'm not so much that way myself, although I'm very determined and very stubborn in my own ways. But that full warrior-like boom, it's not so much me, while I really respect it. On the other hand, boy, that wolf of hate is such a powerful force these days. And whether it lands someone in prison because of something that happened for them, in the worst 20 seconds or 20 minutes of their life, or can be exploited by authoritarian leaders who are really good at manipulating the feeling of grievance and being contaminated by the dirty other. And so we're going to go get them, right? I think we have to be really, really careful about the wolf of hate these days.
Yeah, I know that.
What do you think about all that?
Domestic violence has definitely gone up these days. And there's more cases of that. And it's interesting because just to kind of extend on what I was talking about in this work with the maximum security, these are young people, 25 and under, who are in for life, double life. By that time in their life, they spend maybe 1.5 to 2 years in solitaire.
Yeah.
And I was with a group of 25 of them, and I said, at this point in your life, given your circumstance, what is your most meaningful life?
Right.
And their answer was the same that I would have given.
Yeah.
To be a dad to my kids, right? To help the children from my community not make the same mistakes I made. To be a leader, to be an entrepreneur. Like, they had vision.
That's great.
But they're in a situation that they're never going to get out of. So what we're working on is trying to engage that hope mechanism with them. But it's really interesting because they're people that have really mastered this really well, right?
Yeah.
How to be in isolation and how to do that for probably 20 seconds of the wrong decision or a lifetime of wrong decisions. But what were the motivations around that? So, I think that's a really good observation.
Yeah. Did you see the movie The Mustang?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
I highly recommend it. It's basically about a real program that uses the taming of wild horses in Nevada as part of a prison program. And there are moments in the movie, it's not a spoiler here, that are deeply haunting, in which there's kind of a therapist there, a psychologist, a woman who runs a group, and she goes around the circle, and it just, she asks people, how long did it take you to make the choice that landed you here? And, people will talk about, they'll look away, they'll pause, they'll go 20 seconds, 2 minutes, 2 seconds, no time at all. You know? And it's really, and boom, that changed their life forever. That choice, the gratification, the reward they reached for in those 20 seconds is now costing them for the rest of their life. And that's very, very poignant, very, very haunting. I think about my own mistakes, not scaled at a level that put me in jail, but most of my mistakes in my family as a father or a husband began with my anger. Yeah,
I agree. Brushes with something that could have gone very easily the other way. It's interesting because we submitted a survey or one question to our audience, and the question was, what is your number one struggle in creating happiness? And we did a word cloud. And I want to see if you can guess what the biggest word cloud word was. Now, I'm not trying to set you up here, but I'm just curious to see what
number one. So what people in general would say,
what is your number one struggle in creating happiness?
Wow. Worry.
Well, I'll tell you what the word, I'll give you.
Stress, worry, doubt.
The biggest word cloud was feeling, and then that was followed by fear, and then feeling, and then that was followed by depression. They didn't just say fear. They didn't just say depression.
I see.
Say stress.
Yeah.
It was the feeling.
Yeah. That's like the opposite of happiness.
Right. And you talk about how, our emotions are driven by, our brain.
Yeah.
And being able to control those emotions. And really it just comes down to what are we feeling and what kind of chemical response are we reacting to that our brain is making us feel at the time, and then controlling that. Is that accurate, or?
The reason I'm pausing is I think what you're speaking to is a profoundly deep question. And there, are we minds? Are we bodies? Are we body-mind processes? What are we really? Are we partially spirit? Like, well, what?
Yeah.
And for me as a practical person, I get down to, well, what are you feeling and what would help? What are you experiencing? What's it like to be you? What are you thinking? What are you wanting? What are you craving? What are you remembering? What are you experiencing? And what would help? It's very practical.
Mhm.
So in terms of the what would help part, I think three kinds of things can help. And I'm just going to name them. I'll say it like this. If your mind is like a garden, you can relate to it in three ways. One, you can just witness it and be mindful about it. Feel it, experience it, do that skillfully. So you step back from your feelings so you're not swallowed up by them, and maybe and bring compassion to what you're feeling. Very important. Bring acceptance to what you're feeling, and even feel the deeper layers of it, to have the courage and also build up some strengths that help you feel what's more vulnerable and deeper. I think for myself, going back to anger, if I had had the mindfulness in the moment and the courage in the moment to drop down to the actual softer feelings, that I felt hurt, I felt disrespected, I felt mistreated, I felt lonely, I felt worried, I felt abandoned, whatever it was underneath it all, then I would not have, just blasted somebody and gotten into trouble for it later.
Yes.
So first, we witness the garden. We be with it. And that takes a lot of courage, especially, I think, I'm going to make a generalization.
Yeah.
Men in particular, I find to be courageous when it comes to physical action in the mountains, for example, or in war. And they often are courageous when it comes to business. They'll take chances in business. But when it comes to interpersonal courage, interpersonal vulnerability, really stepping into it and staying in the fire of it with another person, they're often not so courageous. And so that's a place to develop it. Second, we let go. We pull weeds. We let go of desires that get us in trouble. We release tension out of our body. We let go of thoughts that are just wrong, that are crazy talk inside our head. We just don't believe it anymore. We release. We pull weeds. And third, we grow flowers. We grow what we want to grow. That's how we can help ourselves. We can help ourselves learn from what happened with that other person and be a little more patient next time, a little more skillful next time, take them into account a little more effectively next time, or realize this is someone that is never going to change. That dog will never hunt. Don't send a duck to eagle school, right? Move on. Anyway, so whatever it is, or we just start to feel happier inside, or more like we're of worth, just recognizing our own goodness and to feel more confident about that. So those to me are the three ways, really, to gradually become happy, and also to become more effective in our business, to become a better dad, a better husband, become a better friend. We do those three things. And they all kind of work together. If you're upset about something, we usually start with the first one. You just feel what you feel. And then at some point you move on to trying to let it go, disengage, step back, drop the chalupa. And then third, you move into what can you learn from this experience? What could you receive into yourself to replace what you've released? If you're letting go of worry, can you bring in the feeling of calm strength? If you're letting go of addictive craving for something, can you bring in a feeling of reward, a feeling of pleasure in a more wholesome, bigger kind of way from something else, right?
Yeah. How do you pull that weed? I know that when I get those thoughts, I want to ruminate in them and I want to roll around in it and I want to feel bad about myself or feel that anger. Is there a process that you use to identify and say, well, there's that thought? I've heard somebody say, they say, hello, now go,
Right. Hello, goodbye.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great question. So I'll just name a couple things and see if we relate to. So one is often when we're ruminating, that's a way to avoid feeling. Bingo. it serves the function. It's a defense in psychological terms against really feeling sometimes. And often there's a feeling underneath the rumination that if you just open to feeling it, it would be like a circuit breaker and you'd quit thinking the same thing again and again. You'd sort of, you open to the feeling. That's one way. Another is to be aware that you're ruminating and to really have the wherewithal to step back and ask yourself, is this productive? Am I getting anywhere? And sometimes you are. You're chewing on something. Rumination, comes from the word chewing your cud, like cows are ruminators. So you're chewing your cud. That's how you digest. All right. So you kind of think about it. I knew a teacher who said, think the same thought again and again. That's fine. But 10 is enough, right? You get to a point where, no cheese down this tunnel anymore. No muss. There's just no value here. I'm kind of, there's no payoff really. There's only pain. There's no gain here. And you recognize that. And to really recognize that, that's a key. Another one, I'll tell you a couple of things in the book that are based on recent science that I have found to be almost magical. So if technically in the brain, if you're ruminating, there's a lot of activity in the default mode network. This is a part of the brain that's in the midline of your cortex. If you were to draw a finger from the middle of your forehead between your eyes and then go back over the top of your head just before, and then just as it starts to curl down, that's the midline. Imagine the rearward half of that roughly spreading slightly to the sides. That's what's active when we're daydreaming pleasantly. It's also where it's active when our mind is wandering, we're just spacing out, thinking about this or that. And it's also what's active when we're negatively ruminating. We're resenting, we're worrying, we're beating ourselves up, we're regretting the past. Okay. So pragmatically speaking, literally, physiologically speaking, we want to reduce activity in the ruminator, in the default mode network. And a key way to do that, that's really powerful, is to bring awareness to the internal sensations of breathing. Feel the air coming in, feel your chest expanding and contracting. Immediately that reduces verbal activity, and it tends to bring you out of the default mode network because you're tuning into your body. You're doing interoception. Also, if you focus on what's actually happening in the present, being here now, the continually changing quality of the sensations you're aware of, that where there's a sense of being alerted, in effect, by the next new thing, the next quarter second of the next new thing, the next second of the next new thing, continually. This focus on the sense of updating the field of consciousness is also like a circuit breaker, and it shuts down the default mode network. Because if we're spacing out back in Jurassic Park or in the Stone Age, you can get away with it a little bit, but as soon as you hear a little crackle in the brush nearby and you're alerted by that, you need to pull out of the ruminator and come into the present to deal, right? Yeah. So those two right there, tuning into the internal sensations of your body and really coming close to the present, just cut rumination. I'll give you one more little trick too that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I love it. These are great.
Yeah, and they're based on real.
The power of breath and focus on breath and breathing has changed my life.
How?
It reduces anxiety. It helps my system calm. I can go to sleep with it. I can get into a meditative state when I'm climbing based on my breathing. And I don't get anxiety in those times when you're wondering, are we ever going to get there? Or holy crap, if I slip, I'm screwed. It's just breathe and breath and body movements. And it's done a lot for me. When I find that I'm getting really anxious or really angry, I will default to breathing. Yeah. And I almost do it automatically now. It was a real chore for me to get to that practice, but it's just, your advice. And I think that you talked a lot about that the last time we talked. So I really started to focus on it.
Here's another really cool one. And you could do it right now if you want. Like we're here together, is to get a sense of your body as a whole.
Okay.
It's sort of like widening the spotlight of attention. So you're aware of sensations and there are a lot of little sensations in the body as a whole. It's sort of like a unified single field of experience that has many little sensations, pop, 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 occurring in it. You could do it with your chest. So you got to be aware of breathing on the left side of the chest, breathing on the right side of the chest, and then left and right together.
Mm-hmm.
So you have more and more of a sense of the whole. When you do that, neurologically, it's so cool. It reduces activity again in this midline, which is a part of the brain that's very involved also in mental time travel, going into the future, going out back into the past. There's a place for a little bit of that, but that's so much of our suffering is about mental time travel. So if you disrupt mental time travel, you disrupt a lot of suffering. And so when you get a sense of things as a whole, it reduces activity in the midline cortex, these circuits, and it increases activity in circuits on the sides of your brain, especially the right side of your brain. For right-handed people, the right hemisphere, because it does holistic processing, it's flipped for left-handed people, but the point is the same. And when you start engaging those circuits on the sides of your brain, they bring you into the present with things as they are, just as they are, without adding all the complications and neurotic BS that we tend to add to things. So that sense of your body as a whole, or you could get a sense of the room as a whole, do that. And then the last trick, I'll just name it really fast, is to look out to the horizon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When we're upset about things, we tend to naturally bring the gaze close to us, which activates what's called an egocentric, self-referential frame of reference, which makes sense, friend or foe. Are you going to eat me or can I eat you?
Yeah.
What's up? It's close. It's personally very relevant. But when you move your gaze out, and you can just notice it next time you're upset, move your gaze out 10 feet, straight out, even up to the corners of the room or the sky, look out a window. Within a breath, within a dozen seconds or 24 seconds, you'll feel a shift in your consciousness. You'll have more of a sense that's impersonal, less.
Me just looking out beyond and not at the screen at you, just kind of, I felt something change.
Bingo. Yeah. Right. You're using different circuits in your brain. And those circuits help us see the big picture, have the bird's eye perspective, panoramic view. And what we do then is we get more information. We feel less caught up in taking things personally. We feel less, mini me, little me, right? And we have more of a sense of everything just through moving your gaze out to the horizon.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then it's great. And then you start to understand, that's why the great teachers talk about sky of mind or look up to the heavens, maybe there's some reasons why those traditional practices work.
So what happened? How come we went away from all those practices? Is it because we felt like we got super smart with old science, or because the science is proving that they were right now?
Yeah. Isn't it weird? I think you're really right. Wow. I don't know. I lived through it, right? I came of age when organized religion started really taking a beating in the 60s and 50s and onward. And now, I don't know. I just feel, I'll say it like this. I don't know. Like, do you feel rooted? Like, I feel I've become rooted, but I started out feeling very kind of alienated and rootless. And I think a lot of us have lost our sense of roots. So then we look for sources of that sense of home in a bottle or a joint or in a cult or a political cult, right? A sense of belonging, and that's how we get that sense of home, by identifying ourselves as against the dirty, contaminated other bad people. And I just think that's so unfortunate. And kind of my hope in a way is that as people do what you teach and what I'm exploring myself, as they come home to themselves, they feel more rooted and at home in themselves, and therefore more at home in the world and less vulnerable to the craziness of people who are always looking for the next thing to fill that big hole in their heart.
Yeah. I hope that the awakening that we're going through right now is something that takes root a little more permanently, because we can all of a sudden, everybody can relate to each other.
Yeah.
Whereas
We're in this
before,
together.
we just kind of like, you're doing your thing in Poland and I'm over here and, wherever, or,
Yeah.
even with family units, because they're so close and knitted together now that it's really, I hope changing for the good, that we can support one another. And
If you were to offer one, this is a question I ask people. So
Mhm.
I'm like turning the tables on your podcast. I hope it's
Uh-oh.
okay. Well, no, I hope it's okay.
Oh yeah.
Well, like me, I think on the one hand, the human species has been here, evidence, 300,000 years, and we had ancestors who were manufacturing tools another 2 million years before that. It's been a long, strange trip, right? As the Grateful Dead puts it. Right. On the other hand, I'm very hopeful somehow that in the 21st century, we will finally get our act together and pull together for the greater good, not just for the good of the few, but for the good of everybody. I hope so. But to do that, we're going to have to make some serious changes and really focus, right? And I think there are different levels of intervention, like politics, public health, rule of law. Okay. I focus on the individual mind because I'm a therapist. So here's my question for you. I ask people this question. If you could get 1 billion people to do one thing for 5 minutes a day to change the course of human history, what would be the one thing you'd suggest? There's no right answer. There's just your answer. It could be an evolving answer. What would you suggest that 1 billion people do every day for 5 minutes?
Think of someone they can forgive.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Erik. I've never heard that answer, and I've asked a lot of people this question. That's very powerful.
Yeah, I think it takes all the angst out of it, and a lot of it is starting with yourself. But my hope for the future personally is I think there's gonna have to be the old guard has to die out. That.
How do you define the old guard?
Well, look around at the news, right? And here's my point. I think that the youth, and when I look at my children, they're more sensitive, they're more compassionate, they're a lot less caught up in the dogma of things. And they're just, I just think that the younger generation is being raised to be more compassionate, I hope. Now there's bullying and there's increased, like social media is just blowing it up, but I hope that there's that balance somehow. So who knows, because we're seeing the world more as we're in it together versus us versus them.
Yeah.
I think that'll happen. Okay. So thank you for that question. I've actually thought about that. But that's the one thing that's made the most impact in my relationships with my children and my wife and my family and my siblings. And, there was an interesting thing that happened with my mom when she passed away. So I've got a couple of siblings I just don't have real great relationships with. My mom had a very hard life. Growing up in Denmark, was abused and a lot of trauma. So growing up, I was the only boy with 4 sisters and, what I deemed as a very crazy mom once in a while, a lot of the time. So it was very stressful for me. So I kind of disassociated myself with it, or just tried to distance myself, detach myself from it.
Yeah.
And when I was at her funeral and, looking at her casket at the graveside, I heard 2 words whispered distinctly in my ear by her. And it was forgive. And, I knew what she meant.
Yeah.
I knew what she meant because it was all okay. Like she had kind of evolved into, kind of the next life, and the earthly shackles had kind of been released from her. And she just said, you just got to forgive your sisters, forgive me, and it made a big difference. So yeah, that was really powerful for me. So I appreciate you asking me that, because that's very meaningful to me. All right. So I don't want to hog up all your time, and I do really enjoy speaking with you. I think we are kind of kindred spirits on a level. I'll take that and I'll run with it.
Oh, yeah.
What are you most excited about in the science of happiness and neuroscience, and that isn't, we haven't arrived yet, but you think we're going to get to in the near future?
I'm excited that the science, really hardcore science, is showing us the power of practice. It's like the science is telling us, to use a metaphor, that if you just work your arm muscles, a minute here, 10 seconds there, 10 minutes in a row, every so often, you will literally grow bigger muscles for real.
Yeah.
Unlike your real arm muscles,
Yeah.
who need to be worked harder than that, as I've learned painfully as I've gotten older. So the power of practice. And honestly, Eric, it's funny when people, like when I'm talking with somebody and there's an opening in the conversation, a lot my question really is, okay, how are you feeling? What are you experiencing? What's it like to be you? How's it going? We take a little bit of time with that. And then the natural question is, okay, how are you practicing with that? What's your practice? What's your relationship to the anger or the addiction or the physical pain in your body or the grievous loss? What's your relationship to it, and how are you working with it? Not to blame the victim, not to ignore the importance of making the world better around us, but meanwhile, the essence is self-reliance. How are you practicing with that? And so it's kind of a general answer to your question. There's not some sort of magic thing that if you only just, look out to the heavens, everything will be fine, right?
Yeah.
But it's deeper than that. It's old school. It's like, we got to practice. And science is really teaching us that if you do practice, if you give it 10 minutes total a day, a breath here, a breath there, a minute here, a minute there, 5 minutes in a row. And if you want to keep going, fantastic. More the better, right? But 10 minutes a day, most people will not practice with their minds constructively, even a minute a day, let alone 10 minutes a day. And yet the science is telling us that if we do practice, we literally physically change the brain for the better in lasting ways. And we take the benefits with us wherever we go.
That's amazing. And I think that there is kind of this codependency of people who are suffering and their therapeutic outlet or connection. And there isn't that independence. So one final question, because I'm super curious about your answer to this, is how do you incentivize or motivate people to do that?
To practice.
Yeah.
Well, I think first, it's great questions. A key first step is to really, really listen to them. Because I find that when people feel really received and they can kind of take a breath, it's like they've found their footing in the mountains or the mountains of life, like they feel really heard. Like then there's something that happens. There's like a shift in us, and we're such social primates. We're so tribal. We want to feel heard. I've spent a lot of time with children. I did my PhD dissertation on 15-month-olds, toddlers.
Oh, wow.
About what they wanted.
Very interesting age.
Oh, super well. Okay. And yeah, extremely. And the key thing is toddlers want to get what they want. Okay. They want the cookie. But more importantly, they want to know that their parent understands that they want the cookie, right? That the parent understands what they want, not just gives them what they want, but actually receives and understands, is empathic with what they want. And even more deeply, we need to feel that the other person cares about what we want. They may choose not to give it to us for good reasons, because it would be the fifth cookie and you got to save some for your sister, but they care about us having what we want in a deep way. So I think that's part to motivate people. It's to start before giving them my infinite wisdom or my advice about how to do it better, is to really hear where they're at and to really give them the gift of feeling felt. So important. I think that's
very powerful.
And then it's to really ask people, really straight up. Okay, what's the payoff? How's it help you to do what you do? What do you get out of it? You know, not knocking it, just what function does it serve?
Yeah.
Because it serves a function. What's the payoff? Explore that. And then what are the costs? What's the price for yourself, for others, for the long run, short-term gain, long-term pain? What's the price? And then key question, money question, what could be a better way that you believe in? What could be a better way? And then you're in the question of, do you want to help yourself move more and more in the direction of the better way? Now, then you bump into stuff as a therapist or as a person. You bump into the ways in which the other person maybe has secondary gain from that old way of being, and they don't really want to take that better way, or they've been gaming you along, or they're trying to get you to buy into their whole racket. And so then you deal with that. But let's suppose they really do want to go the better way, even though 90% of them is a habit that takes them down the low road, but 10% of them or even 1% of them really does want to choose the better way. Then it's really important to associate rewards of different kinds with the higher road, and to help a person register that it feels good. It feels better, and to really focus. It's like, it's like the mouse and the cheese. You want to give them the cheese, so they go down the tunnel with the cheese. So like the higher road, you want to help them experience the reward of the higher road, the good feeling in it, the self-respect in it, the sense that others are with you, others are cheering you along. It's courageous to take the higher road. It's noble. You're going to help yourself, all that. And then more and more, you develop a new habit. Yeah. But, here, you may have heard this. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change.
Oh, yeah, I think I have heard that.
Yeah, so that's the crux, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I did that long answer, to get to the point where that person sincerely wants to change. Maybe because they've hit bottom, or maybe because they've just done a full and fearless inventory, to use that language, of their life, and they've come to the conclusion that it's just not worth it anymore. To go down that other road. It's just not worth it. It might be fun a little bit, but really it's not the road I want to take. And then I want to help myself keep on walking, the higher road.
Yep. Yeah. So you have to show that, that's a fantastic formula. I'm going through it in my head. I'm going to rewind this and listen to that again. Thank you so much, Rick.
It's fun hanging out with you.
Oh, I love hanging out with you, and I could talk to you for days.
Yeah,
really appreciate it. Neurodrama?
No. Neurodharma.
Dharma.
Neurodrama.
Neurodharma. Neurodharma. Okay,
that's good. Neurodharma. It's a weird word, but at least it's memorable.
Dharma.
Yeah. And to really stress, it's not religious. I have friends who are Christian ministers and who love this kind of stuff because it's so relevant to what they do.
Yeah.
It's universal. And that's great.
Well, you say new science, ancient wisdom, and 7 practices of the highest happiness. And we weren't able, I think we went through some of the 7 practices without really labeling them.
That's right.
But the highest happiness is certainly something worth working towards, and is achievable. You believe that's achievable?
I really do. And if you'll permit me, I'll read the first paragraph, which has a metaphor in it, which you and I both relate to from our time outdoors. Here we go. I've hiked a lot in the mountains, and sometimes a friend farther up the trail has turned and looked back and encouraged me onward. Such a friendly gesture. Come join me. Watch out for the slippery ice. You can do it. I've often thought about those moments while writing this book, which is about the heights of human potential, about being as wise and strong, happy and loving as any person can ever be. If those heights are like a great mountain, awakening is the magnificent journey that carries you along toward the top. Many real people have gone very far up. The great sages and teachers throughout history, as well as others no one has heard about, and I imagine them turning with a sweet smile and beckoning us to join them.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. I have so many images going through my mind as you read that. It's wonderful. It really is wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you do amazing work. I know you're changing lives and you're helping so many people. And I just really am grateful for the time that you set aside to join us today.
Oh, it's an honor, Erik. Really, the pleasure is mine. And thank you for what you do.
Yeah. Well, you'll be hearing from me.
Okay, good. I hope
More
so.
questions. So
I do hope so.
This is base camp.
Let's keep going. Okay, bows to you, man. Thanks so
All
much.
right. Thanks, Rick. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.